Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's talk. While we are observing Rabindra Jayanti today, it's Rabindranath Tagore's birthday according to the Bengali calendar. And today's talk would be focused on imbibing Tagore, and the topic for discussion would be a patriot, not a nationalist, Rabindranath Tagore, and the idea of India. Guru Nanak College, Dhanbad, has a legacy of observing historical days in its own ways. In the same line, we recently celebrated Jane Austen's birthday through an Austen carnival. We also celebrated World Art Day recently through an art exhibition and workshop. And most recently, we celebrated World Book Day with book and poster exhibition, along with several performances. It was on 23rd April, while we were celebrating the World Book Day, when the president of the College Governing Council, Sardar R.S. Chahal, reminded me of Tagore's nearing birthday, which we celebrate every year. That is when we started planning for this day. Coming to today's topic, today at this critical moment, while the country and the world lies deep in the dilemmas of understanding, misunderstanding, nationalism, internationalism, patriotism, secularism, etc., there is this man who stands unhindered and tall with his ideas and ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about Rabindranath Tagore, the man who called Gandhi Mahatma and whom Gandhi called Gurudev. It is necessary at this point to distinguish between patriotism and nationalism. And that's why today's topic in discussion partly derives itself from Ramachandra Guha's observation. Tagore was a patriot without quite being a nationalist. A man of prodigious literary and artistic accomplishments, Tagore played a leading role in Indian cultural renaissance and came to be recognized as one of the architects of modern India. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, wrote in Discovery of India, Tagore and Gandhi have undoubtedly been the two outstanding and dominating figures in the first half of the 20th century. Tagore's influence over the mind of India, and especially of successive rising generations, has been tremendous. Not Bengali only, the language in which he himself wrote, but all the modern languages of India have been molded partly by his writings. More than any other Indian, he has helped to bring into harmony the ideals of the East and the West, and broaden the basis of Indian nationalism. Tagore's career extended over a period of more than 60 years, not only chronicled his personal growth and versatility, but also reflected the artistic, cultural, and political vicissitudes of India in the late 19th and the first half of the 20th century. To quote Tagore, today, at this critical moment of the world's history, cannot India rise above her limitations and offer the great ideal to the world that will work towards harmony in cooperation between the different people of the earth? The idea of India is against the intense consciousness of the separateness of one's own people from others, and which inevitably leads to ceaseless conflicts. Let us be rid of all false pride and rejoice at any lamp being lit at any corner of the world, knowing that it is a part of the common illumination of our house. Tagore also believed that patriotism can't be our final spiritual shelter. I will not buy glass for the price of diamonds, and I will never allow patriotism to triumph over humanity as long as I live. That is Tagore. So while I was working on the proposal of today's talk, I couldn't think of anybody else but Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta. Thank you for joining in, ma'am. Professor Dasgupta is a voracious reader, a writer with voluminous publication, critical and creative, a poet, translator, critic, and most importantly, an ardent lover of literature. She has devoted a large amount of her life reading, critiquing, understanding, and writing about Tagore. Thank you so much for accepting our request for this talk, ma'am. Now, to move on with today's session, I would now request our principal, Professor Sanjay Prasad, to kindly offer the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Varsha. We come to nearest to the great when we are great in humility. With these words of Tagore, good morning to each one of you present in the webinar. It's a moment of extreme pleasure to welcome you all to attend this one-day talk on behalf of one-day talk on Tagore. On behalf of Guru Nanak College, I welcome our key speaker of today's program, Professor Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, Madam. I welcome Dr. Devjani Biswas, Madam, DSW of the university, our university, Binod Bihari Mahato, Koilanchal University. I welcome our Secretary Sardar Diljon Singh Grewal, former Principal, Professor P. Shekhar Sir, the two professors in charge, Professor Amarjeet and Dr. Ranjana, HODs, faculty members, and my dear students. Ravindra Jayanti is celebrated every year to mark the birth anniversary of Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. It is Tagore's 161st birth anniversary this year. Our tribute to the great poet and writer, whose profound and articulate poetry and prose is still shaping the literary universe. However, as per the Bengali calendar, the Tagore's birthday is celebrated on Pochise Boisak, and perhaps that was on 7th of this month. However, we keep on celebrating his anniversary for a week or even for a fortnight also. I congratulate Department of English that they have decided to organize a talk on imbibing Tagore, a patriot, not a nationalist, Rabindranath Tagore and the idea of India. I feel delighted to take an opportunity to introduce the key speaker for the day. And she is none other than Professor Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, Madam. She is professor and former head, Department of English, and former Dean, Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University. She has been the recipient of many doctoral and postdoctoral scholar in Residence Grant, Australia-India Council Fellowship. Apart from invitations to participate in national and international seminars and conferences, Dr. Dasgupta has taught and lectured at universities in USA, UK, Europe, and many more countries across the world. She served as the jury member and chairperson of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, United Kingdom. She is the President, Executive Council of the Indian Poetry and Performance Library, Kolkata. She is convener of the English Language Board of Sahitya Academy, Ministry of Culture. She is also a member of Sahitya Academy's General Council. She received many awards from within our country and across the world. Professor Dasgupta, Madam, is a poet, short story writer, critic, and writer of 23 books which have already been published. I can name a few of them, not all of them. It's a long list. Tagore, At Home in the World. Radical Rabindranath, Nation, Family, and Gender in Tagore's Fiction and Films. Tagore's patriotic songs. Towards Tagore, a collection of aces. And likewise, so many books are there. She is an outstanding and world class writer. I welcome you, ma'am, in this program, and we feel indebted that you have accepted our invitation to deliver a talk on Tagore on this auspicious day. Once again, I welcome you all to attend this webinar, which is going to be very illuminating. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. I would now let you all know that Dr. Debjani Bishwas, who also happens to be the Dean Students in Welfare of our university, was supposed to join the event, but because of some urgent requirement, she had to travel. So she has sent us a short clip for everybody. So I would play that as her introductory statements for today's event, and then we'll move on to the keynote speaker of the day. Well, I believe there is some issue with the presentation and it's not running properly. So we'll now move on to, we'll now move on to our speaker of the day without waiting too much because there are some glitches, I think, in the presentation. So with this, I would now request and invite Professor Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta for today's talk. Professor Dasgupta, as our principal sir has already told, is a poet, short story writer, critic, and translator, and a writer of several books. it's impossible to talk about her entire profile because she has done a lot of writing, reading, critiquing, translating in her entire career. So, with this, I would now request and invite Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta to deliver today's talk on Tagore. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Varsha, for inviting me and for this opportunity. Hello, everyone. Respected Principal Professor Sanjay Prasad, thank you for that very generous introduction. Varsha Singh, who has been a friend I have not met, but I feel we are friends. And Dr. Devjani Biswas, Professor Amarjit Singh, and of course, all those who are present here for this event, especially this is a very auspicious day for the whole of India to celebrate the birthday of Rabindranath Tagore. And for those of us who have considered Tagore not somebody in the public domain, but like a family member, only a little invisible, but more visible than ever. And for us, of course, Tagore has been always somebody to learn from. And for me in particular, as I wrote in a poem that was published in the Statesman yesterday, it is no exaggeration to state that I regard him as my soulmate. And so, in my life's journey, Tagore's contribution in terms of support, in terms of a friend in need, in terms of a friend, philosopher, and guide, has been of never failing inspiration to me. I asked Professor Varsha about what I should talk on. So she was very generous about saying, well, on anything about Tagore, she said, but I have a favorite. And so she suggested this topic, which is a very challenging topic. And somehow I like challenges. And so I thought, oh my God, so Varsha is setting me homework. So so I had to do some serious reading to come to certain conclusions, and my conclusion would differ a little from Ramchandra Guha, and that is really something that I'm not very confident about, because Ramchandra Guha is a formidable name. And here, me, minuscule me, if I want to introduce myself in comparison to the overwhelming presence of Ramchandra Guha as one of the best historians of the world, especially in his study of India, modern India. Then, of course, I have to have some courage. It's good that we are all pictures, and so your reactions cannot reach me physically, but see what comes out of my engagement with Tagore, and whether he was a patriot or a nationalist, as suggested by your teacher, and also somebody who is really immersed in Tagore, it seems, from the little interaction we have had. And so this is how I would like to start now. A patriot or a nationalist, Rabindranath Tagore and the idea of India was the topic that was suggested to me. Now, around 123 years ago, Rabindranath Tagore had written a poem titled The Sunset of the Century, which was presumably published first in Bengali on the 31st of December, 1899. And this is what the poem is all about. The greatest honor we can do to a poet is to start off with a poem. A poet who won the Nobel Prize, the first Asian, not only the first Indian, the first Asian in any category to have been awarded the Nobel Prize was Rabindranath Tagore. So I would like to begin with a poem in the fitness of things in terms of this being his birthday. And as many of you know, he even wrote his own birthday song, He Nuton Dekhadik Arbar Janmero Prathomo Shubhakkon. He was quite bored and thought it was so cliched to sing what we all do, happy birthday to you. So the poem that I'm going to read in order to introduce the topic, which is titled The Sunset of the Century, begins like this. The last sun of the century sets amidst the blood-red clouds of the west and the whirlwind of hatred. The naked passion of self-love of nations in its drunken delirium of greed is dancing to the clash of steel and the howling verses of vengeance. The hungry self of the nation shall burst in a violence of fury from its own shameless feeding, for it has made the world its food, and licking it, crunching it, and swallowing it in big morsels, it swells and swells, till in the midst of its unholy feast descends the sudden heaven, piercing its heart of grossness. So, descension of heaven and piercing its heart of grossness is like almost a Durga or even a Shiva image. Now, 17 years later, in his widely acclaimed and equally widely criticized lectures delivered during visits to Japan and the USA in 1916 and 1917, later published as the booklet Nationalism, Rabindranath Tagore's non-conformism to any binding, much politicized ideology becomes more than obvious, as he states in Nationalism, in those lectures, that nationalism is a cruel epidemic of evil that is sweeping over the human world of the present age. The brand of nationalism Tagore was warning the home and the world against was a hypocritical world of corrupt power mongers for whom he stated, and I quote from Nationalism, clever lies become matters of self-congratulation. Clever lies. Nowadays, we say that we live in the era of post-truth. So clever lies become matters of self-congratulation. Solemn pledges become a farce, laughable for their very solemnity. The nation, with all its paraphernalia of power and prosperity, its flags and pious hymns, its blasphemous prayers in the churches, and the literary mock thunders of its patriotic bragging, cannot hide the fact that the nation is the greatest evil for the nation, that all its precautions are against it, and any new birth of its fellow in the world is always followed in its mind by the dread of a new peril. It's really extraordinary and quite strange that a poet like Rabindranath, who seems so very mystical in some of his poetry and the songs he has scripted, as well as in his love songs, could write in this manner, absolutely uninhibited in his disgust of the interpretation of the nation by certain vested interests. Was Tagore gesturing towards a self-positioning as a patriot rather than a nationalist? But then in 1908, Rabindranath Tagore had written in a letter to his friend A.M. Bose, where he stated, and I quote, patriotism can't be our final spiritual shelter. I will not buy glass for the price of diamonds, and I will never allow patriotism to triumph over humanity as long as I live. And that is this quote Varsha has also recited. So, what should we think of him then? Neither a nationalist nor a patriot, not a member of any leading political groups and parties? Then who was Rabindranath and what were his dreams and vision about India? The country where he was born, the country that he loved with intense passion and understanding, the country struggling to gain its independence from the stranglehold of British rule. By his own self assertion, then, Tagore quite overtly stated that he could not be pigeonholed as a patriot or a nationalist. He stated that his role in the world was that of a poet and nothing more, especially rejecting the honorific Gurudev as an antithesis. It is very common to address Rabindranath as Gurudev. He resented that completely. He stated that he had always steered clear of gurus. In fact, Tagore virtually ran away from classrooms and was intensely skeptical about teachers who promoted learning by rote. Tagore answered the question himself quite assertively, discouraging all wild speculations. So, in a letter which he wrote on the 17th of April 1926, he stated categorically, and I quote, "I am neither a guru nor a political leader. I am a poet. I create in various moods and rhythms. These are my creative toys. This is my job. If people derive pleasure from these creations, I feel fulfilled. That's my dharma, my commitment, and I take total responsibility about maintaining my dharma." Here it is possible to assert without hesitation that Rabindranath Tagore was a public intellectual who combined aesthetics and philosophy. To him, the subjective reality was as political as the experiential reality, as manifest in the public domain. The personal is the political, of course, in a very different context. He would have agreed with the romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley's declaration that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Poets through time immemorial played the dual role of being the voice for the people, the silent masses that is, and the voice of conscience, both often stifled by the voices of self-seeking promoters of political ideologies for profit and power. In this promotional game of igniting intolerance, hatred, and violence, religion has often been used as a lethal weapon to divide the weak, helpless, and voiceless people with spine-chilling effectiveness. Now, before referring to Tagore's views about his skepticism regarding patriotism and nationalism further, let me try to understand the defining features of patriotism and nationalism, which I want to share with you. Now, standard definitions of patriotism, which originated as a classical concept, was about human solidarity and universal human kind. Patriotism is defined as a feeling of attachment and commitment to a country, nation, or political community. Patriotism, or love of one's country, and nationalism, loyalty to one's nation, are often taken to be synonymous. Yet patriotism has its origin some 2,000 years prior to the rise of nationalism in the 19th century. Greek and especially Roman antiquity provide the roots for a political patriotism that conceives of loyalty to the patria as loyalty to a political conception of the republic. It is associated with the love of law and common liberty, the search for the common good, and the duty to behave justly towards one's country. Now, an explicit link between nationalism and patriotism can be found in the German philosopher Herder's work. In Herder's view, that is Johann Gottfried Herder, in Herder's view, patriotism refers not to a political virtue, but to a spiritual attachment to the nation. In this context, fatherland becomes synonymous with the nation and its distinct language and culture, which give it unity and coherence. And it's very interesting that in Asian countries, especially in India, we address the country as motherland. In first world countries, which follows this classical order, however, the country is referred to as fatherland. And so it's really, we have feminized the nation, whereas the Western countries use a very masculine and very patriarchal signifier in describing the country in terms of a symbol or a metaphor. Thus, instead of linking patriotism to the preservation of political liberty, Herder associates love of one's country with the preservation of a common culture and the spiritual unity of the people. While in the classical Republican tradition, fatherland is synonymous with political institutions, the nation is pre-political, and love of one's national culture is a natural inclination that allows a people to express their distinctive character. Hence, in the eyes of advocates of new forms of patriotism, stable democratic societies require a strong sense of solidarity. Another form of interpretation about patriotism is provided by the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who seeks to describe patriotism as we understand it in terms of politics, is constitutional patriotism, which seeks to ground the loyalty of citizens not in the idea of a pre-political homogeneous community, but in a commitment to universal liberal principles as enshrined in the constitution of the modern liberal state. To ensure that citizens who subscribe to different cultural, ethnic, and religious forms of life can coexist in and identify with their own country on equal terms. Now, such cosmopolitan patriotism is said by advocates such as British-born American philosopher Appiah to give rise to a rooted cosmopolitanism. This is the term used by Ramchandra Guha. And rooted cosmopolitanism that couples attachment to one's homeland and cultural particularities with an appreciation of different places and different people and a robust respect for the equal moral worth of all human beings. On the other hand, nationalism is an ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation state surpass other individual or group interests. Nationalism, we all know, is a modern movement. Throughout history, people have been attached to their native soil, to the traditions of their parents, and to established territorial authorities. But it was not until the end of the 19th century that nationalism began to be a generally recognized sentiment molding public and private life, and one of the great, if not the greatest, single determining factor of modern history. Because of its dynamic vitality and its all pervading character, nationalism is often thought to be very old. Sometimes it is mistakenly regarded as a permanent factor in political behavior. But it is not till the 19th century that nationalism as a concept began to make its presence felt in the entire world. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, nationalism flowered in Asia and Africa. In the 19th, it was the old world, that is, the whole of Europe, and of course, the USA. But at the beginning of the 20th century, nationalism flowered in Asia and Africa. Thus, the 19th century has been called the age of nationalism in Europe, while the 20th century witnessed the rise and struggle of powerful national movements throughout Asia and Africa. Now, after I will not go into the history of it all. Nationalism began to appear in Asia and Africa after the First World War. And in India, we know about the concerted efforts made by Mahatma Gandhi in India and also several very dominant political parties. After World War II, that is the Second World War, India, Pakistan, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, Burma, Myanmar, and Malaya, Malaysia in Asia, and Ghana in Africa achieved independence peacefully from the British Empire, as did the Philippines from the United States. Now, that is in general how nationalism and patriotism is interpreted in standard manuals of political history and also in terms of international relations. Let us look at how Tagore would have regarded this. Throughout his life, Tagore remained deeply critical of nationalism, a position that pitted him against the political leadership of Mahatma Gandhi too. Tagore argued that when love for one's country gives way to worship or becomes a sacred obligation, then disaster is the inevitable outcome. And as again quoted earlier by Varsha, this is what Tagore wrote. I am willing to serve my country, but my worship I reserved for right, which is far greater than country. To worship my country as a god is to bring curse upon it. Please notice this very, very categorical statement. Tagore wrote these lines in The Home and the World, a novel published in 1916, and the words were spoken by Nikhil, one of the two protagonists in the novel, and Nikhil has often been regarded by literary critics as representative of Tagore's alter ego. Tagore's dismay for the fervent nationalism that had gripped India was further shaped by the First World War in 1914. And so, speaking in Japan during the war, around the end of the First World War, again in nationalism, he once again uses the English language with so much of assertive power and so much of disdain. And he says that the political civilization that was overrunning the world was based on exclusiveness. Our dream should be one of inclusiveness. So based on exclusiveness. And it is always watchful to keep at bay the aliens or to exterminate them. So not about inclusiveness, not about recognizing diversity. And then look at this phrase. It makes you really jump up from your seat. And so he describes such a world by stating it is carnivorous and cannibalistic in its tendencies. It's not only homicidal, but carnivorous and cannibalistic. Remember the poem that I just read, 1899? Again, around 1916, 17, in the lectures on nationalism, he was once again stating the same idea in prose. It is carnivorous and cannibalistic in its tendencies. It feeds upon the resources of other peoples and tries to swallow their whole future. It is always afraid of other races achieving eminence, naming it as a peril, and tries to thwart all symptoms of greatness outside its own boundaries, forcing down races of men who are weaker to be eternally fixed in their weakness. Unquote. In the in the then influential Calcutta Journal of the early part of the 20th century, colonial India, a journal named Modern Review, Tagore wrote about an international desire to achieve the unity of man by destroying the bondage of nationalism. And he argued he didn't have a real sense of nationalism and noted, and there he's almost becoming anecdotal. He's talking about his own childhood and his own nurturing as a young adolescent. And he says, even though from childhood I had been taught that the idolatry of nation is almost better than reverence for God and humanity, I believe I have outgrown that teaching. And it is my conviction that my countrymen will gain truly their India by fighting against that education which teaches them that a country is greater than the ideals of humanity. Subversive, disruptive, and quite radical. Yes? And so Tagore, even to this day, is not quoted as often by political leaders because of their discomfort with his views, because these are the views of a dreamer, the views of a visionary, the views of a lover of mankind. And if he is disgusted with the world, it is a lover's quarrel with the world. So after the horrendous Jallianwala Bagh massacre of April 13th, 1919, Tagore's liberated spirit and an active conscience led to his thunderous rejection of the knighthood conferred on him by the British monarchy. I thought I would refer to this particularly because I'm speaking in Guru Nanak College. And I searched for certain evidences of Tagore's familiarity with Bhagat Singh, but I unfortunately could not find it. Probably it's somewhere tucked in his stupendous volume of works, and one day I will be able to locate that. But this is what Tagore had stated after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. The time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in the incongruous content of humiliation. And I, for my part, wish to stand shorn of all special distinctions by the side of my countrymen who, for their so-called insignificance, are liable to suffer degradation not fit for human beings. And these are the reasons which have compelled me to ask Your Excellency, that is the King, with due deference and regret, to relieve me of my title of knighthood. How free would a person be to be able to return an honor that in colonial India this was very difficult. It was the time when the British were ruling India, and Tagore just rejects the knighthood and returns it with great disdain and flourish. And so it is very remarkable, uh, this letter that he wrote almost a month later on the 30th of May, 1919. So it is Tagore's creative journey in the scripting of his prose and poetry that his universal humanism that transcend the myopia of patriotism and nationalism are registered. As a result, Tagore has often been described as a rooted cosmopolitan, which I referred to earlier. And in terms of the changes that we locate, now I think I should be a little more aware of time now. Now, the first reference that we get is from the Swadesh poems, that is the patriotic poems, which are written around 1905 when the British tried to partition Bengal and were successful for a period of time. But then again, the partition of Bengal had to be aborted. This was brought over. This was generated by Lord Curzon, and Tagore moved very quickly in terms of resisting the British, not with arms, not with bombs, but with songs. And that is the Swadeshi spirit of rhetoric that Tagore suddenly seemed to have brought in a lot of inspiration and awakened the mind of the Bengalis of both East Bengal and West Bengal. But suddenly he moved away. He did not linger in his stand for too long. And that is because he did not want to drive a wedge between the Hindus and Muslims of Bengal, and which Tagore found very difficult to accept. So, and you have witnessed that when you have read The Home and the World, Ghore Baire. So what were the poems of Tagore during this period? The earlier ones, of course, was a lot of very ostentatious ways of celebrating the motherland and the concept of the mother, almost like Bankim Chandra's Anandamot. But then from poem number 15, there is a change. And I will just read you a short passage from that. It is called Bharat Tirtho. The poem begins with Hemor Chitta Punno Tirthe, Jagoro Dhire. O my soul, in this holy pilgrimage site, awaken softly. But the lines that I want to read are, no one knows who is it that has beckoned so many streams of people. Like a tempestuous current, they came from somewhere unknown, only to be absorbed in the sea. Here the Aryans, non-Aryans, here Dravid, China, Shakhun groups, Pathans, Mughals, mingled in the same flesh. The West has opened its doors, many bring gifts from there. Give and take, mix and mingle, not to return. At this seaside of Bharat's great people. And the most significant, welcome Aryans, welcome non-Aryans, welcome Hindu Mussalman, welcome, welcome you English, welcome, welcome Christians, welcome Brahmins. The only warning is to the Brahmins. Welcome Brahmins, cleanse your soul, hold everyone's hand. Come subalterns, let all insults be raised. In the mother's coronation, hurry and join. The holy pitcher is yet to be filled with everyone's touch. The pilgrim's and with everyone's touch, the pilgrimage site will be purified. So if everyone doesn't touch Bharat, then if there is a group of untouchables, then that Bharat remains tarnished. Now, from this, we go on to 1910. This was 1905, partition of Bengal. 1910, very quickly, let us just travel with Tagore now in quite high speed. And so it's Gora. And Gora says, I think there is something lacking in our patriotism. We see only half of Bharatvarsha. And so Gora says, why? We see Bharatvarsha only as a land of men. We don't see women at all. And so, again, Gora realizes when he understands that his parents are not the Hindu parents he knew, but to be his parents, but then he approaches, and that he's an Irish man, he approaches his surrogate mother, the Hindu surrogate mother, Anandamoyi, and says, Ma, you are my real mother. The mother I sought everywhere was waiting in my own home. And then he adds, you have no caste, no discrimination, no contempt for anyone. You are the very image of goodness. It is you who is my Bharat Varsha. So this was Gora's liberation from fundamentalism to being a liberated eclectic. We go on to the home and the world. There are these one-liners: to tyrannize for the country is to tyrannize over the country. And then again, in home and the world, if the cow alone is to be held sacred from slaughter and not the buffalo, then that is bigotry, not religion. And then a question, is there any country where submission to government is not due to fear? The freedom that exists in any country, it is referred to, may be measured by the extent of this reign of fear, where its threat is confined to those who would hurt or plunder. There the government may claim to have freed man from the violence of man. But if fear is to regulate how people are to dress, where they shall trade, or what they must eat, then is man's freedom of will utterly ignored. Man's freedom of will utterly ignored, and manhood destroyed at the root. It's really very strange sometimes to even accept that Rabindranath wrote this in 1916, more than a century ago. Again in 1934, in Tagore's novel Charodhai, which is an unequivocal critique of the armed struggle, the Swadeshi movement against British rule, Tagore has been criticized for his rather pacifist and deeply philosophic counter-discourse that distances itself from militant nationalism and revolutionary politics, and even Gandhi's Satyagraha, the civil disobedience movement, Netaji's call for armed resistance. So in Charodhai, 4 chapters, the male protagonist, Antu, tells his beloved Ila, who was a revolutionary, committed revolutionary, and Antu tells her, I am not a patriot as you conceive of one. There is something bigger than patriotism. Deception, pettiness, mutual suspicions, conspiracies for power, and spying will one day pull them down into cesspools. So every time these politicized ideas of patriotism and nationalism through coercion by certain vested interests is being questioned by Tagore and rejected. Even in his lifetime, Tagore's criticism of nationalism made him an unpopular figure. Gandhi had famously commented, criticizing Tagore, and in an ironic mode. Gandhi's English, as you know, was very good. He could rival any of the English writers. And he said, the poet lives in a magnificent world of his own creation, his world of ideas. Very dismissive, very sarcastic, very ironic. But they were great friends also. Yes? So it's a friendship of sameness and difference. The poet, though, was hardly unaware of the criticism. And he said that I know that my entire country is very skeptical about my views. And so he thinks that he might even be jailed if he returns to India. He was telling a friend while he was visiting in 1921 in New York. And he said, my solitary cell is awaiting me in my motherland. In their present state of mind, my countrymen will have no patience with me who believe God to be higher than my own country. See again that irony in the statement. Therefore, from these significant evidences of Tagore as an apostle of liberation, the poem that he included in the English version of his volume of poems, Gitanjali, that led to the poet being awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, the first Nobel Prize to be won by an Asian in 1913, is poem number 35, which is in its essence a hymn, a mantra, an oath for all thinking individuals belonging to all parts of the world, irrespective of race, location, class, caste, religion, and gender. This is the poem which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It is this one poem in the Gitanjali that is still quoted frequently by both parliamentarians as well as poets throughout the world. And the poem is, I know you have guessed it, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action. So it is not about mindless adherence to certain rigorous rules by certain voices of the establishment. It is about the freedom of the mind to make its own choices. Where the mind is without fear, only then the head can be held high, of course, which means that you have to have a strong and upright backbone. So, in conclusion, we may say that Tagore was neither a patriot nor a nationalist, as defined in political history. He was a poet whose writing was his activism, an activist poet, we can call him, a creative freedom fighter, and a pathfinder for all generations and all races. Therefore, Tagore could state categorically, with the courage of his convictions, that he was neither a nationalist or a patriot, but a poet, and a poet philosopher committed to universal humanism, denouncing the arrogance of a fragmented world dominated by fear and ruthless violence. So, true to his ilk, in his last essay, written a month or so before his death, titled Crisis in Civilization in 1941, Tagore had re-emphasized his apprehensions about a world set on the course of self-destruction, as he had warned in his poem Sunset of the Century, written in 1899, the poem with which I began this talk. Tagore's consistency and unwavering convictions is truly outstanding. So Tagore could declare, which very few can, I am not a patriot. I love India, but my India is an idea and not a geographical expression. Therefore, I am not a patriot. I shall ever seek my compatriots all over the world. So, what he's saying here is that he is not into those narrow boundaries of, of territories defined by nationalism. So, and he is saying, I shall ever seek my compatriots all over the world. So he's asserting the view and the fact that he is an internationalist, a cosmopolitan. It is this spirit of freedom, Tagore's rejection of the highly politicized interpretations of patriotism and nationalism, and unstinted love for all humanity, irrespective of caste, class, color, race, religion, gender, and location, that makes Rabindranath Tagore even more relevant in the troubled times of the 21st century. Tagore undoubtedly is a timeless icon of monumental importance, a universal humanist, and a leader for all thinking individuals. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I know that just like me, a lot of students who have just time traveled with Tagore, with Sanjukta ma'am, must be feeling delighted. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this.
Thank you.
Sanjukta ma'am began with a poem, The Sunset of the Century, which was published on 31st December 1899. She discussed Tagore as a public intellectual, as a poet. She also represented the idea of patriotism, which is basically the love of one's country, and also nationalism, which is the loyalty of the nation, as she's mentioned. She also brought in German philosopher Herder and his idea of patriotism, which is spiritual attachment to motherland. She also talked about nationalism, which is pre-political, basically. Ma'am also brought in Jürgen Habermas, his idea of patriotism, which was constitutional patriotism. She also mentioned and talked about rooted cosmopolitan, which was referred by Appaya and later on discussed by Ramachandra Guha as well. She brought in Tagore's discussion and mentioned that Tagore was deeply critical of nationalism, and she also talked in detail about the disasters which he thought were related to nationalism. She also told that we should, that Tagore would often say that we should dream of inclusiveness, which was against the political scenario at that time. The political scenario at that time, and even in today's time, is focused on exclusiveness. However, Tagore was always talking about inclusiveness. She mentioned about the carnivorous tendency of uh, political people. She also talked about the unity of man, which was brought in by Tagore. She also talked about the disruptive idea brought in by Tagore when he said that country is greater than the ideals. The disruptive ideas which were floating at that time, that country is greater than the ideals of humanity. However, humanity should be greater. That is what Tagore believed. He also decided to return his knighthood and made a statement at that time. Ma'am also talked about Tagore's universal humanism, Tagore's role in freedom struggle, his presence during the partition of Bengal, his texts from Gora to Home and the World to Char Adhyay, and finally summing up with his very famous poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear. Ma'am has established in today's talk that Tagore was not a patriot, not even a nationalist, but a poet, pathfinder for humanity, fighter for freedom from all fears. She mentioned that Tagore was, is, and certainly will always be the timeless icon that we would always look forward to. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this enlightening talk on Tagore and telling us about Tagore in a very detailed manner and making our students aware of his ideas and also his texts. Thank you
Thank
so much. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, you
Now, yes, ma'am.
are really brilliant in this writing of an abstract of the entire thing. I mean, I would never have been able to do that.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That's very kind of you. Uh, Thank you, ma'am. Now, with this, we are open for the interactive session. If you have any questions, if you have anything to say, the session is open for interaction. And let me tell you, we will have to end today's session by 2. So make sure that we don't go unlimited with time. So please drop in your questions if you have any. We also had Basudra Di who joined us. Thank you so much, Basudra Di, for joining in. Basudra Di has mentioned, and thank you, Sanjukta Di, for such a rich and insightful session. Please drop in your questions if you have any. Any questions? Anybody willing to say something? I think all of you are awestruck right now. Supriya, do you want to say something? Supriya, please unmute yourself and ask if you have anything to ask.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your glorious session. And my question is, if Tagore's notion of patriotism or say activism, where individual identity was associated with humanity, spirituality, or sociality, is applicable in today's world? If yes, how and how much is it challenging to rejuvenate his idea of patriotism in today's materialistic world where a kind of post humanism is prevailing, dealing with the issues like religious intolerance, impacts of war, more specifically that Russian Ukraine war, corruption, avarice of power, capitalism, climate change, and all other that destruction and overexploitation of nature? And that's all. This is my question.
Thank you, Supriya. Why don't you switch on your video? Let's me see that. What a question. So you have covered so many areas in that one question, a very loaded question and a very good question also. So yes, if Tagore, the relevance of Tagore is that what I have been repeating all the time, that we have to rise. It isn't that everything has changed radically from the beginning of the 20th century in terms of politics. Politics was as complex as it is now. Yes, politics then was as complex as it is now. The practices have changed. And otherwise, politics in terms of its effectiveness, in terms of the way in which it was used by various power sectors. Yes, and there is no time really to go into all those details, but an obvious one is also the disagreement between Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Bose is one, which is about even the Indian National Congress at that time was not free from this constant power politics that was going on. Yes, there in each ideological standpoint, there was an embedded power struggle. It's the same even now. What is the difference now is that the role of the media. The media is able to reach us to the remotest parts of the country. At one time, it was absolutely limited to the print media. Now, the difference between the print media and the visual media is the fact that in print media, you have to have at least a certain amount of literacy, not only reading ABCD or signing a name, but you should be able to read a newspaper. Whereas when the appeal is to uh, the now to the audio and the visual, as you see the common tendency not to read, and students would rather like to watch pictures rather than read, and a PowerPoint presentation is the best thing under the sun, and the way it is, and children like to watch cartoons, they hate Cinderella and things like that. So we have evolved in terms of, we have more information nowadays, but at the root of it all, the basic human nature, which the Christians would call the 7 deadly sins. Yes, there we have not changed. We have become worse, if you really want to qualify it at all. So the sins that have been identified, like greed, like envy, like violence, these are part of our own personal constitutions. Yes. And how can we get rid of those? Through self-discipline. And therefore, if we see that the social fabric, the political environment is vitiated by the buzz of these 7 deadly sins as such, yes, we understand that we have to transcend. We cannot be pulled into this quagmire. We cannot be pulled into this cesspool, as Tagore has said. We have to transcend it. And as a young person, we have lived our days. Yes, as a young person, it is you and the young citizens of India who have to rise above this and think in terms of an inclusive world, a world which is exclusive, a world which is discriminatory, a world which is about not deterritorializing, but about territorializing. And a totalitarian world is one which has to be rejected by our mind, which should be a wonderful sort of fusion of rational understanding, emotional intelligence, empathy, and to have a sort of even a transcendent spiritual understanding, but at the same time, not to be aligned with any sort of fundamentalism. And even in terms of the Ukraine war, the Western media we are horrified by what is happening in the Ukraine war. Tagore would have been horrified too. But as you know, it's not only a war between Ukraine and Russia. Yes? So it's really the war between NATO countries and Russia. Yes, Ukraine is being just user friendly. So we will not go into those details, but Tagore would say, I will go into those details. I will point it out. I will be there to point out why is NATO there. We feel scared. We are not very confident about asserting ourselves in the way in which Tagore did, because Tagore was not afraid. Mind without fear can only lead to a head held, being held high. So if you are scared, if you do not have the courage of your convictions, then you cannot go it alone. So যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে একলা চলো রে will not happen if you don't have the confidence. Then you would like to hide in the crowd. Yes, all of us do. It's common tendency. Ore baba re ki hobe. So that is common everywhere. That is why we will never be Rabindranath Tagore. But we can learn from him. we can try to acquire from him some of that confidence, some of the courage, some of the courage of the convictions, and some sort of liberation from the sort of totalitarian dogmatic knowledge that we learn in terms of a fragmented understanding of the universe. Fragmented, not a holistic, not an inclusive understanding of the world. Yes? So it is this fragmented understanding which leads to all the problems in the world, which is why literature departments should also step into becoming world literature departments, not only literature departments of the Western world, which is showcased. Yes, literature department, we don't know what is happening in Korea or Vietnam or Africa for that matter. Yes, so we need to know so that we can make these comparative studies. We need to know that we are all together in a human chain, which is what Tagore believed in. Yes, Tagore believed in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family. And his own university, Vishwabharati, translated into English was the world in one nest. If you fight so much, how can you be in a nest? The nest will collapse and fall off the tree. Yes? So the world in one nest is to have this sort of compassion and mutual cultural understanding. And what destroys it all? Power, politics, and profit. Yes, the 3P words. And as a gender commentator, of course, my area is that really. I would say power, politics, profit, and patriarchy. Yes, all these are destructive words. And I think I should leave you there because are there any more questions, Varsha? Because we have to end by 2 o'clock.
Yes, ma'am. No, we don't have any more
Okay.
questions.
Supriya, did I answer your question properly?
Yes, ma'am. It was
You have.
perfectly answered. I am
Okay.
all cleared, all clarified.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you
ma'am.
so much. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Supriya, for the brilliant question that you asked. Now, before we move ahead, I would like to tell all of you that on 8th May, Sanjukta ma'am's
ma'am.
poem got published in the Statesman, and I would love to read that out for all of you.
Please do, Varsha.
And the poem is titled The Brilliant Bard of the Universe, and it is dedicated to Tagore, of course. So this is how the poem goes. Sir, what would we have done if you were not there, dear soulmate? Could we have striven for a fearless mind, a head held high? Would we have tried to release ourselves from the dreary desert sand of dead habit? Could we have bathed ourselves in the clear stream of reason? Friend, philosopher, and guide, rare Rabindranath, stay within us as our pathfinder. We are so helpless, we are so weak. Cast the light of your words and songs on the encircling gloom. Dispel the dense darkness of self-obsession. Let your message guide our souls towards a transcendent heaven of compassion and bliss, love and trust. O poet, you are not just the bard of Bolpur. As the bard of the universe, lead on, soulmate. We will follow together or all alone, reaching towards the pristine rays of the radiant sun, the gentle shimmer of the star-filled skies, the gardens glorious with luscious fruits and dazzling flowers, the flowing rivers, the restless waves, in constant touch and go playfulness on your birthday every year. Dear soulmate, our friend and mead, like every day, every night, hum your timeless songs, and dulcet words ceaselessly in our hearts, in our souls, in our minds, in our veins. Make our journey joyous and sweet, suffused with love, light and more light. Yours, Sanjukta Dasgupta. Thank you so much for this brilliant poem, ma'am. It was a lovely dedication to
Thank you.
Tagore. So with this, we have now reached the formal conclusion of the event. And for that, I would like to invite Head, Department of English, Guru Nanak College, Professor Amarjeet Singh, for a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Barsha. It was indeed an erudite talk. In this segment, first of all, I would very like to thank Dr. Gupta for the profound discourse. The talk on Rabindranath Tagore on his Jayanti is actually our heartfelt love and regard for the Nobel laureate. To me, it seems that there is a keen line between patriotism and nationalism. Madam Gupta has given her elaboration on a very relevant topic, which is highly useful and beneficial to the students and teachers as well. So, a big thank you to Madam for gracing the occasion and giving the talk.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to thank President R.S. Chahal sir for his blessings and cooperation in such programs. Secretary Sardar Johnson Grewal for his constant support. Dr. Devjani Madam, Dean of the University, Principal of the College, Dr. Sanjay Prasad, a constant support to us. Former Principal of the College, Professor P. Sekar sir, a man of literature who has always inspired us. And the teachers of the college for the presence and the students who have participated and got benefited from the program. Varsha, I think that we should have more programs and invite Madam Dasgupta in an offline mode if it is possible. So thanks all. Thanks all. Thank you for participation and thanks for the talk, Madam. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh.
So with this, we come to the end of this program. And I would again thank Sanjukta ma'am for her kind acceptance for this talk. Thank you so much, ma'am. We are really grateful.
Thank you, Varsha.
Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day ahead and see you all very soon.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Varsha.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.